next speaker. She is the bioethics chair at St. John Paul the Great Catholic High School down in Dumfries. Sister has her doctoral degree in Thomistic philosophy, so don't mess with her. Or you can try, but she will distinguish and answer. Right? She's been a sister 35 years professed, which is awesome. And she's been at Pope John Paul the Great High School down there for 7 years. We have a little bit of history. When I was pastor previously at Holy Family in Dale City, before the high school was built, Sister Mary Jordan, the principal, was looking for office space. She needed an office for a year before the high school was built, and so I gave them the basement of my rectory. It had several rooms that were not being used, so they set up their temporary office, and I got to know the community of the Nashville Dominicans who are down in Woodbridge. They are there both at St. Thomas Aquinas Regional School in Woodbridge, as well as John Paul the Great Catholic High School down there. So we go back a ways, and you must know that Sister, because of her expertise, really developed the bioethics curriculum at St. John Paul the Great High School, which I believe is unique in the nation. There's no other high school in the nation where students can have a bioethics curriculum, and Sister is the one that developed it and who teaches a lot of it. So give it up for Sister Terese Auer.
Thank you for the welcome. Thank you, Father Planty. He was extraordinarily good to my community when we began at St. John Paul the Great. And let me just make a comment about what we're doing there before I get into this, because Dr. John mentioned those books back there. At St. John Paul the Great, we really owe Bishop Laverty the thank you, because he's the one who had the great idea for the bioethics curriculum. He's the one who said, when we were getting the school going, he's the one who asked my community. He said, we want the graduates, the young people who graduate from there, to be able to address the issues of our day, particularly the bioethical issues of our day. And so then he asked us to design a curriculum to do that. And so the way the curriculum goes is the kids have to take 4 semesters over the 4 years, so a semester each year. And the 2 upper level junior and senior courses are the bioethical issues at the beginning and at the end of life. But in order to understand those issues, we wanted the kids to know why things are right and wrong, not just this is right or this is wrong. For a couple of reasons, because that's the nature of human beings, to know why, particularly teenagers. And they won't really make it their own or be able to pass it on unless they know the why of it. They won't really accept it. My degree is in philosophy, as Father mentioned, and so it was kind of my specialty to look at the whys of things. And so the first 2 courses, and that's what the 2 books back there are about. The first course is about the human person. People don't understand today why man has the dignity that he has. We value a dog as much as we value a human being, but maybe even more so today. So there's a real loss of our dignity. And so that first book explains it from a philosophical point of view, Thomistic philosophy. In other words, how can anybody, just using reason, what can we know about man's value? And then the second half of that text looks at the sexual issues. Once we understand our dignity as a human being, what the powers of our soul are, then how ought we to use our bodies in a way that would reflect that dignity? The second book is Thomistic ethics. So ethics is right and wrong, judging voluntary acts to see which acts will get us to happiness and which won't. So it looks at what's human happiness, what do we mean by moral law and conscience, what makes an act good or bad.
So both of those books deal with what would normally be taught at the college level, only brought down to the high school level. John Paul the Great also offers in the evening classes for the parents of our students or any interested adult who's interested in coming, because we want the parents to be on the same page with their kids, their sons and their daughters in the matter. And so that's what's going on there, okay? So if you're looking for a book that deals with what I'm going to be talking about today, those books don't do that. Okay, they're more general. All right. Artificial human reproduction and ethical evaluation. I'm going to start with this slide at the Sistine Chapel just to put out some preliminary comments. The human person, a person with a spiritual and immortal soul. As I proceed to talk, we're talking about fetuses and embryos and how we make human beings. We can never lose sight, no matter how a human being comes into existence, no matter how, whether through the marital act of a loving husband and wife, through an act of rape, through artificial reproduction, the person who is created, or made, would not be a human being unless God directly infused into that human matter a spiritual and immortal soul made in his image. And so that makes every human being, no matter how they come into existence, of immeasurable value. The other thing that's what that picture's to remind me of anyway. The other thing is that I have had students that I have taught who have been made through in vitro. I've had parents that I've worked with, or adults who I've worked with, who have been made through in vitro. And I've talked to parents who have had their kids made through in vitro, which again is another, I only say it to highlight the sensitivity that we need to have when we're talking about it. Because we're talking about the very persons that we're talking to or working with. All right? And we must never lose sight of their dignity. Okay, let's start with the cartoon. It usually lightens things up for my students. The little boy says, "Daddy, where'd I come from?" And the dad says, "Well, a scientist at the test tube baby lab injected you into a frozen embryo." And then he continues, "Then that embryo was implanted into a surrogate mother. But after a while, the surrogate mother decided to sue for custody. And after a long and bitter trial, your biological mother and I won you in a court case." And the little boy says, "I was kind of hoping for the stork story." This is not far-fetched today. It's happening. So let me begin. The common man out on the street is used to the stages of human life, the life of a human being. Infant, child, adolescent, adult, senior. We're all used to that. The changes that occur there, this is a philosophical note, the changes that occur there, as a philosopher, I would call them accidental changes. My kids have to get used to that word accidental. Accidental doesn't mean like it was a haphazard. Accidental, it's a philosophical term that means kind of like the manner in which the thing exists changes, but not the substance of the thing. The substance stays the same. In other words, each of us here was once an infant, a child, an adolescent, and will someday be a senior, if not already there. But we're the same person. The substance stays the same. Those are not substantial changes, those are accidental changes. So if I change the color of my hair or I gain some weight, those are accidental changes. Okay? There are other stages of human life that people are not as familiar with. But let's go back, and I'm not being politically correct here. Life begins with the mom's ovum, which has 23 chromosomes, when the dad's sperm fertilizes it, right? And then we get that new cell, one-celled human being, the human zygote, the first cell. And each of us, at one time, were a zygote, just like we were an infant and an adolescent. But this from the egg and the sperm to the zygote, that's a substantial change. In other words, it's not that something just changed in the manner in which it is, but what it is actually changed. And so the killing of a sperm or the killing of an ovum is not murder, because that's not a human being. But the killing of a zygote would be. I mean, it would be the killing of a human being, depending on whether it's murder or not is another issue. Okay? So, let me add some stages. In the life of a human being. There's the zygote, that's where it all begins. Then from the two-celled stage of the human being up until it's 8 weeks old, it's an embryo. And then from the 9th week on until it's born, it's called a fetus. Fetus meaning young one. But those changes from zygote to embryo to fetus, those are all accidental changes. In other words, what the thing is, what the being is the same all the way through. A little history. Artificial insemination. Artificial insemination means insemination. We're putting the semen in a woman's body, doing it artificially, not through the sexual act. It's one of the earliest reproductive technologies that was developed in the early part of the 19th century as a means of improving animal stock. In the second half of the 1800s, artificial insemination was initiated as a means of treating for infertility in humans. 1932, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is published, and that's where he talks about a 25th century world, you know, with when all these things that are going on today are going on. 1944, the first successful IVF of human eggs occurs. I'm going to be a little bit careful here. What actually happened was that the two doctors put sperm with ovum in a petri dish. It doesn't seem to be well documented exactly, but knowing that explains why in 1949, Pope Pius XII condemns the fertilization of eggs outside the body of the mother. 1968, Pope Paul VI issued Humanae Vitae, requiring that there is a linkage between sexual intercourse and procreation. A necessary linkage, 1968. 1969, successful results of IVF experiments published by Robert Edwards and Patrick Steptoe. Robert Edwards is the one who's most known for being the founder, or our chief, not so much the founder, but the chief developer of IVF. Just interesting, in 1969, the majority of Americans see IVF as contrary to God's will. 1969. 1978, the world's first test tube baby, Louise Brown, is born. 60% of Americans support IVF. A matter of 10 years later. Big change. 1980, America's first IVF clinic opens. 1981, America's first test tube baby is born. As Dr. John mentioned, her name was Elizabeth Carr, born in Norfolk, Virginia. I should tell you also, in 1984, the first baby born from a frozen embryo happened. The first baby using a donated egg occurred in 1984. The first surrogate embryo transfer baby was born in California. In vitro clinics increased in the US from 1 in 1986 to more than 300 by 1999. 1987, the Vatican issued Donum Vitae, a document condemning IVF. That document, Donum Vitae, it's really not too complicated. It's rather simple and small and clear, explaining that it's wrong and explains why it's wrong. And I'll be explaining those reasons as we proceed. 1993, George Washington University researchers perform twin splitting on human embryos. They took 17 human embryos and forced them, to split, allowed them to grow about 6 days, and then destroyed them. What they were trying to do was increase, this was an experiment to try to help with in vitro procedures, IVF procedures. 1996, the first cloned animal, a sheep named Dolly. You know that today, by now, we've already cloned pigs, goats, mice, monkeys, and cows. What's interesting though, Dolly, the sheep, was euthanized in 2003 after developing premature arthritis and progressive lung disease. Researchers have found that cloned mammals often develop genetic abnormalities. Dolly was 6 years old, but she aged much faster than normal. Usually sheep live twice as long as she did. Egg donor use jumped from 2,500 in 1995 to 5,000 in 1996. So the market's picking up rapidly. 1998, 5,000 to 10,000 donor egg babies have been born. Just for your information, in 2010, it's about 30,000 to 60,000 a year from sperm donation. A human embryo is cloned using a cell from a man's leg and a cow's egg. What they do, because it's problematic, it's more difficult to get an egg from a woman because of health problems for the woman. So what they did was take the egg's cow, take out its nucleus, put into that cell the DNA, the nucleus of a man's cell, and like jump-started it. That's philosophical language for got it going, And one of the reasons for doing this, they'll often say is they're after stem cells. They want to get the human stem cells, so they'll let the embryo grow to about the 5 or 6 day stage, I guess, and then take out its stem cells. The United Kingdom in 1998 sanctions therapeutic cloning. There's when I say two kinds of cloning, there's two purposes for cloning. Therapeutic means that we clone someone or some animal for the sake of helping someone else. So we don't allow it to be born, to come to be among, like a human being. If I wanted stem cells to put into my body and use someday, it's very problematic if I use cells that come from someone else, because I have an immune system that will fight anything foreign. And so it would really be helpful if the DNA that is put into my body is my own. So if we clone me and take the stem cells from the little clone of me, that would have the DNA that would fit right into me without any rejection. See the advantage? That's therapeutic. In other words, we have no intention of bringing that little human being to birth so that he can live among us someday. We want to simply use him for the rest of us in some way. So the United Kingdom sanctions that. But reproductive cloning, that means we want to clone an embryo so that someday he can live among us. That's not not as popular. Probably because one of the reasons is because we haven't perfected the techniques of cloning. But at this stage, it's not as popular. October 2001, the first human embryos produced using nuclear transplantation. Nuclear transplantation is, instead of like forcing an embryo to divide, that's a primitive way of cloning. Nuclear transplantation is just, if you think of it, the nucleus of a cell. What they do is they take an egg, take out its nucleus, denucleate it, and put in a nucleus, a somatic cell nucleus. In other words, a nucleus that would have all 46 chromosomes, whole and entire, put it into the egg, jump-start it, and it would be a little, like if they took an egg, take one of my cells, take out its nucleus, put it into the egg, jump-started, that would be a little clone to me. That's nuclear transplantation. 2001, the birth of an infant from cryopreserved embryos. Cryopreserved is the fancy way of speaking of the frozen embryos. Cryopreserved. 2001, the first birth after sperm is taken from a dead man. I have an article here about that very thing. Sperm from dead man used to produce baby. This was a woman in California had a baby using sperm that was extracted from her dead husband as he lay in the morgue. The director of Center for Bioethics at the University of Pennsylvania said he knows of at least 45 cases nationwide in which someone had requested that sperm be taken from a dead man. In 2003, they estimated about 400,000 human embryos frozen in US cities. That's why when Dr. John quoted a number of how many frozen we have, he put it at 500,000 upward. I would think easily 500,000 upward, easily. The reason they're frozen there is because we make more embryos than we need at the time. We make more because it's an expensive process and there's a high failure rate. And so rather than going through the process over and over again, if we make more than we need, then it'll be cheaper. And we'll be more successful, supposedly. 2004, IVF is mainstream medical technology, 450 clinics in the United States. But you know, from start to 2004, when it's mainstream, that's only a matter of not even 25 years. It's really a short amount of time. In 2008, Vatican issues Dignitas Personae, another document on bioethics. I think a number of other people thought that the Vatican would settle the question of adoption of embryos in that document. They don't absolutely 100% settle it. The Vatican does say it's problematic. I think John Paul is the one who said, there's no good way to proceed with regard to them. Keep on going. 2009, an unmarried, unemployed woman gives birth to octuplets. Remember? The octomom? They did it. The occurrence caused people to think that we need to regulate the fertility industry, you know. From what I read, they put 12 embryos into the woman, and to her credit, she didn't selectively abort. But 2010, women freeze eggs for career reasons or to wait for Mr. Right. I've seen numerous articles about this. You know, a woman in her childbearing years, she wants a career. She doesn't want to be tied down with children. Or she hasn't met the right man yet. But her fertility years are slipping away. And so it really is more and more popular to do this, for women to freeze their eggs so that when they're in their 40s or 50s and they're no longer are as concerned about the job or the career, or then they can be mothers or fathers. 2010, a 66-year-old woman gives birth to triplets, and a 70-year-old woman conceives her first child. And just to mention here, do you notice how in both of those cases, are they thinking about the good of those kids? You know? I mean, what age will mom be, you know, when the kid's a teenager? And that's when you need lots of reserve energy. 2010, IVF developer Dr. Robert Edwards wins the Nobel Prize. I just want a quote from him. He stated in a 2003 interview with the London Times, which marked the 25th anniversary of the first IVF baby, this is what the doctor said. I wanted to find out exactly who was in charge, whether it was God himself or whether it was scientists in the laboratory. It was us. The Pope looked totally stupid. You can never ban anything. You can say, hang on a minute, but never say never. And never say that this is the worst decision for humankind. Otherwise, you can look a fool. Now there are as many Roman Catholics coming for treatment as Protestants, unquote. A little more history. 2010, a French study, the largest yet, finds that assisted reproductive technologies double the baby's risk of deformity. I would comment about this. From the little I know of human biology, I know that, you know, when a man ejaculates into the body of a woman, he releases over 200 million sperm. It's a huge number. And the woman's, you know, releasing one egg normally. But the number of sperm that actually get around or close to the egg is much, much smaller in number. In other words, you know what? You're going to get the very toughest, the strongest sperm that make it. It's a survival of the fittest, you know? It's kind of like nature's way, I think, of helping the human beings who come into existence be as strong as possible. So I just wonder myself if, you know, when we select the sperm and they don't go through that harrowing task, you know, of going through the woman's body, and especially if we select a particular one and put it in, you wonder if maybe nature has ways of sorting through sperm that are better than what we're doing. I don't know. It's just a thought. But I know there was a nurse who worked up at Philadelphia Children's Hospital up there. She made a comment to me about the high number of children in the hospital who are in vitro babies. 2011, 155 human-animal hybrids have been created in British laboratories since 2008. Now, there's a variety of what these hybrids mean, you know, like putting pigs. Some pigs have human blood because we're trying to understand or study viral infections. A cow's egg with human cells because we want to get stem cells, things like that. But they're also, they're putting like brain cells into the brains of mice to study, see what's going on. Human brain cells into the brains of mice. So things like that are going on. 2012, scientists announced they have created human embryos with the genetic material from 2 women and one man. You've heard of that already. This is a way to try to get avoid mitochondria. What's that? Forget the word. A disease, mitochondrial disease that is sometimes in the outer part of the egg of the woman, and so scientists in Oregon discovered a way to transplant the nucleus of an egg supplied by one woman into an egg supplied by another donor. When fertilized by a man's sperm and implanted in a woman's womb, the resulting embryo would carry the genetic material from 3 different people, because there's some genetic material in the outer part of the egg. It offers a means of overcoming mitochondrial disease. At least 2 children have already been born with genetic material from 3 donors in 2012. Expense, now this is on the low range. You'll find statistics, they're all over the board on this. From start to finish, it could be around $12,500. However, it only goes higher from that, depending on if you want one particular sperm put into the egg. It's a ICSI treatment. It's an additional cost of $1,000, $1,500. If you want pre-implantation genetic diagnosis testing, of it, that's another expense. If you're going to get a donor egg or a donor sperm, that's another expense. If you're going to freeze embryo, that's another expense. So it goes up from there. Egg donor compensation, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 per monthly cycle. They usually advertise at college campuses for men and women, sperm and eggs to donate. And why college campuses? Probably because those young adults need money. And usually people who go to college are more intelligent than you're normal, or maybe you would just assume that. So, you get intelligent sperm, intelligent ovum, In October 1999, 3 models auctioned their eggs online. Bids started at $15,000. Those were more pricey eggs, ovum, because they're models. They're the ovums of models. Kind of like ads in newspapers at Harvard, Princeton, and Yale promised $35,000 for donors. While an ad on behalf of an anonymous couple in the Brown Daily Herald offered $50,000 for an extraordinary egg donor. You can see how somebody who's struggling for paying her bills, oh wow, would this be enticing? One agency promised $50,000 to $100,000 to egg donors who meet stringent, personalized search criteria. I should tell you, I was teaching at the college level once, and I had the kids, the young adults, do a paper on artificial human reproduction, and this one woman basically told me the story of her. She herself did it. And I saved her essay. She's so shocking to me. I'm just going to read a paragraph to you. She says, "I gave myself painful shots for 3 weeks of a drug that I knew nothing about, but I was assured was completely safe. My stomach became severely distended. I was nauseous and depressed. The doctor told me that my egg retrieval would relieve these symptoms. When I went in for the retrieval, he put me in a room and sedated me. I awoke in agonizing pain and was much disoriented. The doctor was gone, but the nurse assured me that I would be fine. The procedure went great. They retrieved 24 eggs. Keep in mind that a woman only releases 1 or 2 eggs naturally during each monthly ovulation. After this experience, I received my $7,000. She was 23 years old at the time. I also received a massive infection in my uterus and an ovarian cyst the size of a golf ball. I was very depressed and had severe mood swings and anxiety for about 3 months. I spent about a third of the money on medical care as I was not compensated for my medical problems. The rest of the money was spent quickly on frivolous items. I don't know if the woman became pregnant, but I later found out that my eggs can be destroyed, sold, or experimented on. I will always wonder if I have biological children that I will never know. There is a problem with the egg donation because the people who are soliciting from young adults are the very ones who will be profiting from the solicitation. You know, so it's a conflict of interest. So the odds of them, like, telling the risks that are involved or really fully informing are probably slim. Okay, let's get further than the history. So the various methods. There's artificial insemination, heterologous and homologous. Hetero, meaning different, homo meaning same. Heterologous means the two, the man that the semen is coming from and the woman whose body is going to be inseminated are different by marriage. Understand that? They're not married, in other words. Homologous artificial insemination would mean that they're married. They're the same by marriage. In vitro fertilization, in vitro meaning in a dish, in a petri dish, in a test tube, same thing. Again, it's heterologous or homologous. If the man and woman whose gametes are being put together are married, it's homologous. If they're not married, it's heterologous. And so what it does, the way it happens is they get the woman's ovum, they hyper-stimulate her ovary, and then with a laparoscopy take out the ovum that they want. I've read different numbers of how many they take, anywhere from like 10 to 30. The eggs then are put in a petri dish and fertilized with sperm, and then usually 2 or 3 are put back into the woman's uterus, hoping that one will implant. And the other so-called, you hear of extra embryos, they're either discarded or cryopreserved or used for research, experimented on. This is what I was just mentioning before, this intracytoplastic sperm injection. They use this technique particularly when the trouble is with the man's ability to ejaculate. So what they do here is they take with a micro needle and they put into the ovum one sperm. One other, surrogacy is another method. Surrogacy, the renting of a womb. So sometimes a woman wants a baby, and if she doesn't have an egg, she can get a donor to supply her with an egg. And sometimes she doesn't have the womb to gestate the baby, and that's where surrogacy comes in. So she rents a womb, and they usually sign a contract, so that the woman, the surrogate, agrees that she'll take care of herself and she'll turn the baby over when it's born. And usually a part of that clause or of that contract is if there's any kind of deformity, any kind of problem with the baby, that she will agree to terminate the pregnancy. There was just a case recently about that where a woman in Connecticut, she was a surrogate for a couple, and they found out that the baby was severely damaged. And the mother, the woman who wanted the baby, not the surrogate, she wanted the surrogate to abort the baby, and the surrogate refused. And so what the surrogate did was she left the state of Connecticut, because Connecticut protects, they're all for the surrogacy. And so she went to Michigan, where they have no surrogacy, they're against surrogacy. And so she was protected by a different state's laws. And she gave, it's interesting, the surrogate said that she signed, the contract that she signed said that she would protect the fetus. And that's what she's doing. So when apparently up in Michigan, she gave birth to the baby, and there was a husband and a wife who were willing to adopt the baby. But that was just within 2 years. Cloning, somatic cell nuclear transfer. That's what I've already explained to you. IVF inefficiency. This is very interesting. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine says that just 7.5% of all artificially fertilized embryos will go on to become live-born children. Just 7%. I was first made aware of this in 2010 when that Dr. Edwards received the Nobel Prize. There was an article I read that said at that point in time, as far as records showed, that there were 4 million people alive in the world today because of in vitro. So they're saying, you know what, that's great that he did this because we got these 4 million people who are alive. But the article also said that that number represented only 7% of the embryos produced. Do you see the failure rate? Do you see the number of deaths of human beings? I mean, compared to abortion, this so much greater, the destruction of human life. 2012, they say there's 5 million. I just want to show you the rapid increase in the use of in vitro. Yeah, I read in a magazine or article somewhere, somebody put this inefficiency into these told it in this story. Imagine that there's a married couple. They're out in the patio of their apartment, okay? And they want very bad, they're infertile, so they're suffering from that, and they want very badly to have a baby. And so the guy at the top of the other building, there's an alley in between, okay? He's got, let's say, 15 babies up there. Not extra, but 15 little babies, infants. And he's going to toss them down, a couple at a time, you know, hoping that the couple will catch one. So it goes like this. They got one. Yay! You know, that's the picture of in vitro fertilization that is given to the world in a sense. And it's wonderful. Look at a mom and a dad who want a baby, and here they have a baby. But what about those others? The others that the couple weren't able to grab a hold of. The extra embryos. It was a true life story. I was traveling through one of the states where we have a convent and a school, and I was just there overnight, and the sisters who regularly teach there, they were at a parent-teacher conference, and they had come home afterwards, and this one sister, she was so disturbed. She had had a conference with this couple about their son, and in the course of the conversation, the parents said, well, he's our popsicle baby. And she said, what? And Dad says, well, he didn't laugh about it at first, but now the kid laughs about it. He's their popsicle baby. Apparently, his older sister, about 2 years older, they had her made through in vitro fertilization. And this boy was one of a number of embryos that were cryopreserved. So a couple of years later, you know, the family went back and had another baby. So he's their popsicle baby. So I said to the sister, I said, did you ask the couple? She didn't know what to say. She was just it just came out of the blue, and she had never even. I said, did you ask the couple about his or their other children, or that boy's siblings? Where are they today? It's the same thing. It's like they recognized that this was a popsicle baby. In other words, this was one of our babies who was cryopreserved for a while. But there were others with him, you know? Where are they? And so that's the psychological problems, I think, that Dr. John was talking about that people might be having today. Multiple pregnancies with IVF. There's a 65% increase in twins in 2 decades. In 2007, 145,388 live multiple births born in the United States. Lots of triplets, quadruples, quintuplets, or higher. Most multiple pregnancies resulting from IVF are selectively reduced, a euphemistic term for, aborting them. Okay, now for the ethical evaluation. What do we have to say about these procedures? Well, first of all, they use masturbation to collect semen. That's problematic. I'm not going to go into why it is. I said it once in a college class, and I was talking about this. Masturbation is problematic, and a gentleman off the right says, you mean masturbation's wrong? And somebody over here said, yeah, masturbation, natural law says you can masturbate. And I said, no. So I had to explain in detail why. And we have a generation of people that don't understand masturbation's wrong. So I'm just saying that but I'm not going to explain it now. I don't have time. I'm just going to assume you're with me on this one, okay? It can violate the marital bond. Heterologous violates the marital bond. It's with your spouse, and only with your spouse, that you agreed to, it's to him that you belong, period, particularly with sexually, with anything having to do with procreation. It replaces the sexual act. I put an asterisk there because I'm not going to explain that right now. I will before I finish, because that's key to it all. But I'm going to hold off because it's coming. In vitro fertilization, what about it? Well, it uses masturbation to collect the semen. It can violate the marital bond. Then there's the extra embryos. That's a problem. Cryopreserved, human beings should not be frozen. There's quality control. In other words, if what we've just made doesn't fit up to our standards, we get rid of it. That's the way you treat a product, not the way you treat a human person that you're unconditionally loving. Used for research. Human beings ought not to be used for research. And it replaces the sexual act. Also, I'm going to add, with regard to in vitro, a test tube, a petri dish, is an impersonal environment for a human being. Human beings don't belong in dishes. We belong in human environments, in our mother's womb. What's wrong with replacing the sexual act? What you've probably seen up to this point is, well, the extra embryos, that's a problem, and the selective aborting, that's a problem. If you get rid of all of that, because usually my students will ask me, well, let's say you've got a man and a woman who are married, who love each other, who want to have a child, and we only fertilize one embryo, and we put that one embryo back into her womb, and it implants. Then would it be okay? Okay? That I'm going to answer. And the answer is no, it won't be okay. And it has to do with replacing the sexual act. And so let me try to explain why, okay? So I'm going to first say, this is what people see. In the end, the baby itself is a great good. Remember I showed you that picture of the couple kissing the baby. Oh, that's wonderful. Sister, how can that be bad? Well, their kissing the baby is wonderful. And the baby is a person of great dignity like any of us. That's wonderful. But what you did to get there is a problem. So the end, the baby itself is a great good. The circumstances may be good. That is, the couple may love the baby produced by artificial means just as much as they would love one begotten in the marital act. So I'm not denying their love for that baby that they have made. I'm not denying that. The problem is with the act itself. In other words, what they do to get that, to bring that baby into existence. That's the problem. It's what the church would refer, and an ethicist would refer to as, it's intrinsically evil, which means what makes it wrong is the act itself, not the circumstances and not the end. Question, why? What's so bad about this? Look at that. This is just a clipping out of a paper. Our miracle. How can an act that has such a good end be intrinsically evil? And that's why people have so much trouble seeing or even thinking that there can be anything wrong with this. Especially you Catholics, you're so pro-life, come on. How can you be against this? Okay? So that's what I'm going to try to answer. Because the end, the good end, does not justify an evil means. So what's evil about the means? Well, let's compare the two acts, because I'm claiming that it's the object of the act itself, that's the problem. So what is the marital act? Well, it's an act of mutual self-giving, where the husband and the wife give of themselves so fully to each other. They form one sexual organism. So it's an act of mutual self-giving. It's a selfless act where they're giving of themselves to the other and receiving the other. The fruit of this mutual self-giving is the child. That word fruit is very important because you know how fruit comes onto a tree? It's not something you have direct control over. And if you've ever talked to married couples who would love to have children, you get an idea they don't have any direct control over this. What they have control over is whether or not they engage in the sexual act. But there's no control over whether children come. It comes like they come like fruit onto a tree. And the new person, when he comes into existence that way, as the fruit of the marital act, he's treated as a subject, as a person. When I say he's treated, what I mean by that is the very manner in which he comes into existence, where his mom and dad have no direct control over whether he exists or not, means he comes in just that way, as someone over whom they have no direct control, whether he exists or not. In other words, well, you're going to see it in comparison. He comes in as gift, not as thing owned or product made. In artificial reproduction, the act, what is the actual act? Well, it's an act of getting something for oneself. We want a baby. Yeah, we'll love him, but I want a baby. And so I'm paying you, put those gametes together to get me a baby. Or even if I do it, I'm going to put them together, I want a baby. I'm getting something. And in that regard, and only in that regard, is it a selfish act. I'm not saying that they will not love that baby. I'm just saying the very act itself, not the end, but the act itself, we're trying to get something for ourselves. It's an exercise of dominion over a new product. We're having something made. And I could say someone, we're having someone made. But you get the idea, you see the evidence that this is part of the act when you see the quality control. If it doesn't meet, if this, what we're having made, does not meet up to our standards, we just get rid of it because we have dominion over this. In other words, this human being comes into existence precisely under our direct control. That's what I'm claiming is the problem. The new person is treated as an object, as a thing. The very way he's made does this. In other words, the very fact that you've got human beings in charge of another human being's coming into existence or not puts that person who's being made in a lower position, not on an equal par. We've got maker, thing made, maker, product. That relationship is problematic. And so the way the Creator designed it is that human beings come into existence through that sexual act, an act where they don't have direct control. It's an act where if a person comes into existence, he comes into existence as gift, not as anything parents have a right to. So through the marital act, I hate to use all these words up here, but I'm going to read them to you here. The child comes into existence not as something the parents have merely caused to exist, but rather as the fruit of their mutual gift of themselves to each other. You know, that's actually what the child is. Each of us is a living manifestation of our parents' two-in-one flesh act of love. Our parents can see in us, oh, he's got your eyes and my mouth. Oh, neat combination. You know, it's what we are. We're the fruit of their love. Thus, the child's very identity lies in his being the living manifestation of his parents' self-giving. In other words, it's true to reality. This is the only appropriate way for a human being who is a subject, a person, and not a mere object, a thing, to come into existence. For he is a being of equal dignity to his parents, and thus may not be merely used to meet their need of having a child. A child is a gift, not a right. Marriage gives couples the right to sex, the right to engage in the sexual act with each other. That's where the right lies, not in a child. No one has the right to another human being. It's degrading to a human being for him to be the matter of a right, that over which someone has a right. Nobody has that right. So the ethical evaluation of surrogacy, it involves the ethical difficulties of artificial insemination and in vitro fertilization. So it has all those problems. Then it adds to it, it violates the unity of marriage because it's only between spouses that the sexual act occurs, that the gestation of a baby occurs, only there. So it violates marriage. It objectively fails to meet the obligations of maternal love and responsible motherhood. That word objectively is important here. The woman who wants the baby and pays somebody to gestate her baby for her, she might subjectively, in other words, in her heart, love that baby. But she's hoping that this other woman will take care of it, eat right, sleep right, you know. So she's objectively letting go of her responsibilities. It offends the dignity and the right of the child to be conceived, carried in the womb, brought into the world by his own mother. What about the baby's rights to this relationship with his mom? That relationship starts long before birth. That's why many times the surrogate mother has trouble relinquishing the baby. She's bonded. Nature has done its thing. That baby has a right to that relationship with his mom. It can easily exploit poor women who need the money. Cloning, it belongs to the eugenics project, you know, getting just the right kind of people out there in our society. It radically manipulates the relationality and complementarity, which is at the origin of human procreation. Like the little clone of me would be quite a few years younger than I, and yet my twin in a sense. So who's his mother, who's his father, who's brother and sister? All that's down the tubes. It perverts the basic relationships of the human person. It entails severe suffering for the psychic identity of a clone who's a mere copy of another. Have you ever seen the modern movie, The Island? It presents cloning. It's very, very well done insofar as it presents the problems with it. Views the human person as an industrial product rather than as a gift of love. What about therapeutic cloning? Since cloning is inherently immoral, a good end will not justify an evil means. So therapeutics bad too. It's also evil because the cloned human being is produced simply to be used. If anything, it's more wrong than reproductive, not less. Okay, I'm almost done. Here we go. Moral parameters. The dignity of all human life must be respected at every stage. The goods of marriage must be safeguarded. Every human being has these rights. The right to be conceived by two people united in marriage. That's why fornication is so wrong. With a child. I mean, that's one of the reasons. There are other reasons. He has a right to be conceived in a loving sexual act between his parents. He has the right to be conceived in the personal environment of his mother's womb, not outside her body. He has the right to be gestated in his mother's womb, to develop that relationship with her. He has the right to the genetic gift of two parents, not to be a carbon copy of one. The ethical principle regarding reproductive technology, moral methods assist nature. So fertility drugs, yes, could be used. Clearing out a blockage in the fallopian tubes, yes. Helping the man and woman engage in the sexual act so that it works, yeah. Yes, those would be acceptable. Immoral methods replace or substitute for the conjugal act. That act is really important by the Creator's design. Naprotechnology, this Dr. John talked a little bit about the help that is there. Infertility is a cross for young couples. And so maybe simply pointing them in direction of doctors who will really help them, who will assist them in the helping, them clearing out the fallopian tubes, helping them with whatever medical problem there is. Every human being is to be what the Creator designed him to be, a living manifestation of the two-in-one flesh union of his parents. Amen. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Sister. You said that one of the violations of surrogacy is that the child has the right to be gestated in the mother, that it violates the unity of marriage because only the married couple should, be involved in that way. I was wondering if you could go into some of the nuances of the difference between surrogacy and adoption. Because I've got a gut feeling, obviously,
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it because it always comes up. Anytime I talk about this with the kids, it always comes up that it's like I'm condemning adoption. Not at all. Except sometimes what kids have in their mind today, because I've had to argue this forcefully lately, it's like anybody can raise a kid. And it's fine. And the answer is no, not anybody can raise a kid. The best people to raise a child would be his mom and his dad. Those are the best. And there's all kinds of social science evidence for that kids flourish best. What happens in adoption is this. Something tragically happens. Maybe the death of their parents, or maybe for some reason beyond their control, mom and dad cannot raise this child. And so what happens is the state steps in and says, we know that this kid will flourish best in with a married couple who love each other and who will love the kid. And so the state steps in and says, can we find such a couple? And then it's a very generous act on the part of that couple to raise this child. So it's the state or society trying to make the best of a bad situation is what adoption is. Now, for somebody just bring a child into the world and say, I don't want to raise this kid, we'll put him up for adoption. Well, bad, right, on the part of the parents? They have a responsibility to their children, and the child has a right to know them and to be raised by them, if at all possible. What happens, though, in artificial human reproduction is it's not like the state making the best out of a bad situation. We're making the bad situations. We're deliberately making children in a situation where they're not going to be raised by their moms and dads, or maybe even know their moms and dads. So we're making the bad situation. Big difference. Is that clear enough?
Could you speak a little bit more about the association between the use of antidepressants and the use of reproductive technologies? That's the first time I've ever heard that assertion, so I'm wondering what supports it.
Which assertion?
That there's a linkage.
Between antidepressants and reproductive technologies?
Yes. If I understood both you and Dr. John correctly, you referred to the fact that here in Northern Virginia, there's a high usage of antidepressant drugs, and that there may be some connection to that and the anxiety that's induced by having frozen embryos.
I think he might have cited some statistics. I'm not familiar with that. I was just thinking of human nature, that if a couple has 10 eggs, let's say, fertilized, so we've got 10 embryos, and especially if they freeze some of them, use some, and they have a baby born, freeze some of them. So we've got 7 cryopreserved. Okay, and then we go back and we thaw out one of them and bring that one to birth. Just human common sense thinking, wouldn't they wonder, what about those others? Weren't they also our sons and our daughters? That's all. That's all I know about it. And but I think he had more of the factual. I was just going off of plain old human nature.
5,000 plus human people who are basically in frozen state. I think there are essentially 4 options that we're presented with, all of which, as the church states, are really not acceptable in and of themselves. Those being keep them frozen, thaw them out and let them die, use them for research, which is intrinsically evil, or surrogacy. And studying Catholic social teaching, I think, which we all ought to do, leaves us in this state of not being able to determine which these options are. Can you think of perhaps an alternative that, Dignitas Personae leaves perhaps a little bit of the door open to, that might help us to resolve this problem? I guess just your thoughts on what could potentially be a resolution, if any, in the future.
I think the church has looked at all the options, and none of them, there's no good way out of it, out of the mess we've made. But Father, if you want to speak more to that.
We had a conference on this very subject at Christendom College a couple of years ago where I was chaplain, and we had Father Ted from the Catholic Bioethics Center, and we had Janet Smith, who's also a well-known moral theologian, and they got into a little debate about it because Father Ted said it really would never be morally permissible to implant and have a surrogacy of what they call snowflake baby, someone's a popsicle child, but these poor frozen embryos. Janet Smith was arguing that she could understand that a couple would, out of a desire for saving that child, could have be moved morally out of great charity and compassion to adopt that child and bring that child to term. Now, again, implantation is objectively morally unacceptable, and yet, so what do? We leave these, these are technically human persons. Do we just leave them all frozen? Do we just leave them all? It's complicated, and as Sister said before, there's been no definitive pronouncement from the Holy See in this regard, because it's got so many different levels to it. What, do we leave them indefinitely frozen? And the longer that they're frozen, what kind of effects does that have on them if they were, when they become, pardon the expression, defrosted, implanted, whatever, So it's extraordinarily complicated, as you said, and it seems that all the options are bad, but there's been no no official pronouncement from the Holy See on what to do about it.
Sister, a lot of doctors, when I say that I'm having fertility problems, say you need to do IVF. And then I say, well, we don't believe in using IVF and we're Catholic. And they say, well, you should try IUI because many Catholics do that and that is okay with the church. Can you explain to me what the difference is between IVF and IUI and explain the moral dilemma of IUI or how to explain why that would be contradictory, or is that contradictory to what the church teaches? Because I just don't understand really what the difference is.
Well, I think, I'm not intrauterine insemination. Dr. John, are you familiar?
Intra-uterine insemination is when you take the sperm from the husband and the woman comes in at the right time in her cycle and you place the sperm through a catheter up inside the uterus. So IUI is intra-uterine insemination. It's what's done when a woman comes into the infertility center and says, listen, I'm Catholic, I don't want to go to IVF, but I want something short of that. And I know that there's this discussion back and forth theologically that if the husband's in California and the woman walks into the clinic one Tuesday and gets the kind of thawed semen placed in her uterus, the church is against that because it disrupts the marital act.
You need the marital act.
However, there's this, you know how you talk about moving something past the block? So back in the day when I was listening consciously, you can move the egg, you can open up the tube, you can try to assist the egg around the block. The question was, could you have natural relations and then somehow move the sperm, like just push the sperm further up? And so there were many doctors who tried to, after relations, the sperm would be up inside the vagina. There were many Catholic docs back in the 80s when they were struggling. Could we take some of that sperm, clean it, to get rid of the bacteria in the vagina, and just move it past the block of the cervix? So you assist the marital act rather than replace it. Most people don't do that today. And so that's what I know about it. It's IUI, and that's what it is.
There's also another kind called GIFT, gamete intrafallopian transfer, where the couple actually, they have the sexual act, and then, but he uses a perforated condom, so the semen can go through, but they can also catch some of the semen from the act. Then they put it into a needle with an air bubble apart from the egg and put both of them into the woman's uterus, and so they become one. The fertilization occurs in the woman's body. So they've had the sexual act, they've had conception occurs in the woman's body, and the question is that permitted? And I know moral theologians will argue, yeah, some would say, well, technically yes, and others would say, no, it's too much, and the church hasn't, it's too much finagling, too much manipulation on our part. To my knowledge, the church hasn't made a statement on it.
Thank you, sister. Give it up for sister.
All right.